The Queen may be evil, but I'm wicked. And wicked always wins.
It's time for another Once Upon a Time video with a slightly more positive slant, because we get to talk about Rebecca Mader and why she is an international treasure. The Wicked Witch of the West sure gets around, doesn't she? I mean, for a character who appeared in only one chapter of L. Frank Baum's pioneering The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, she's become one of the most legendary villains in history.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too!
We can, of course, mainly thank Margaret Hamilton and her iconic work in a certain MGM film from 1939, but the Witch is just a very fun character to throw into your Oz retelling and play around with, especially in a post-Wicked world. So when the show, sold as a PG-13 take on fairy tales, makes it clear that any bit of fantasy fiction is fair game, who would be the villain of Season 3's second half?
The Wicked Witch of the West? Seriously? She's real too?
Once Upon a Time's Wicked Witch. Well, to start off, she gets a name that ends in A like so many of her sisters. Rather than Elphaba or Theodora, she's Zelena, which is apparently just because it means green in a few Slavic languages.
What should we call her?
What about Zelena?
In her second episode, she's revealed to be the half-sister of Regina the Evil Queen, firstborn daughter to Cora, who got pregnant with her after a dalliance with a man she thought was the crown prince, and decided to give her up at birth to continue with her plan of social climbing. And yes, I absolutely got the meaning of Rose McGowan being cast as the mother of a witch who's given up at birth.
Now I must give you away to give me my best chance.
Zelena is brought from the Enchanted Forest to Oz by a magical cyclone, adopted by a childless couple, and possesses incredibly powerful magic from birth. On advice from the Wizard of Oz, she travels to Rumpelstiltskin to become his student, since at that point her sister isn't learning as fast from him as he'd like. He passes her over as the one to cast the dark curse that kicked off the whole series because...
The thing you love most is me.
And despite getting an opportunity at redemption, she rejects it in favor of getting revenge on Regina for getting everything she ever wanted.
We are doing it all over again. What I'm casting isn't a curse.
Her evil plan is to cast a spell to go back in time and stop Cora from abandoning her. Of course, she's stopped and defeated by light magic, seemingly killed in cold blood by Rumpelstiltskin, but then returns to do some... stuff before getting redeemed for real.
What if it's too late for me?
Now, although Season 3 is where you can see Once Upon a Time starting to get a little messy, it's probably my favourite overall season of the show. 2 half-season arcs involving fun twists on classic stories and settings, and actually managing to accommodate multiple characters in a way that Season 2 couldn't. Although it wasn't perfect, I count it as the last truly great season of Once. And no, I'm not going to say it's because of Zelena, or in spite of her, because my relationship to this character is very... complicated.
You really don't know who I am, do you?
Zelena had a tough act to follow, since she was debuting after the extremely popular take on Peter Pan as the big bad, and she seemed to be unpopular both because of that and for how powerful she was. Admittedly, it doesn't make much sense for her to be so naturally powerful, since she was born to 2 muggles, and her mother and sister had to be taught magic from scratch, and there's nothing particularly special about her birth, unlike Emma. But Regina had made a full-on face turn at that point, and Emma was starting to learn light magic herself, so we needed someone who could believably match the protagonists in firepower without the benefit of a magical island and Machiavellian planning to offset the disadvantage.
You still don't realize what you had. You never did.
Zelena was a serviceable villain with an interesting plan, and Rebecca Mader's performance really sold me.
What evil, dear? Wicked.
Since the character is so driven by envy and the desire to get revenge, Zelena revels in her villainy, because everything she does is a big FU to her mother for abandoning her, her sister for getting the life she wanted, her mentor for passing her over, her stepfather for... everything. And I personally get it. I've had those moments where FU energy is needed to get through the period or mask the real underlying problem, and what made Zelena a perfect foil for Regina is the contrast.
Why did she abandon me?
You couldn't give her the one thing she truly wanted. The ability to become royalty.
Regina was never lacking in love. Her mother did love her in her own way, and her father did so unconditionally. She got to know true love with Daniel the stable boy, and she did genuinely love Henry when she adopted him. The tragedy of her villainy was in how the things she loved were taken away from her to serve other people's purposes. She couldn't be with the man she loved because her mother's plan was for her to be queen. She had to sacrifice her father because Rumpelstiltskin wanted her to cast the dark curse for his own benefit. And even gaining Henry was all part of someone else's plan so he could reunite with Emma instead of her. Zelena contrasts by having never experienced any kind of love, or at least any that was reciprocated, and she's the personification of the expression cutting off your nose to spite your face, choosing villainy to alleviate the very deep pain that comes with rejection.
Who says it's too late? You chose her. Perhaps there was haste. I am not naive.
While Regina never had a choice in her villainy, Zelena did and rejected those options.
I decided to stop hiding my true colors.
On the first watch of the episode Kansas, I was kind of disappointed at her apparent death, considering the amount of work that went into her backstory and connections to other characters, and it seemed like there was more story left to tell. So when she's revealed to be alive in Season 4, I took it as a mostly positive thing, despite how convoluted it made the author arc as it was already beginning to fall apart.
Once you go green, you'll never go queen.
Upgrading her to regular in Season 5 seemed like a curious choice, since there are only two options to keep a villain in the game. First is contriving ways for them to escape defeat, and for the heroes to still need them and keep working with them, and, well, Rumpel already filled that role. The second is a full-on redemption arc. And the problem with trying to do a redemption arc on a character introduced as a sadistic villain is that it requires you to forgive them for umpteen low moments, which wasn't going to be easy for Zelena because she already caused 2 on-screen deaths, and this.
She's pregnant.
As a result, I wasn't sure if I was actually liking the character or just the actress after seeing things like this.
Should I get a horror movie scream, or would it be way too loud?
But if we have to acknowledge all the ish this character has done in her time, we kind of have to admit that everyone else on the show has done really awful things and been forgiven for worse. Snow tricking Regina into killing her own mother, her and David kidnapping Maleficent's baby, Hook murdering multiple people including his own father and fighting over a woman with his adopted son, Robin cheating on his comatose wife. We don't even have time to get into the Blue Fairy. What I'm getting at is, despite the show presenting rigid binaries of good and evil, the actual message I come away with is that people are just flawed, which is a pretty big understatement considering all of the above. But if we have to hold Zelena accountable, then we should do so by the show's standards, which are pretty simple. Have accountability for your actions, put in the work to do good without expecting a reward, and then you earn your redemption. And when it comes to redeemed villains, there was always material for them to draw from.
As long as I have you, I can never be anything more than a miller's daughter.
Zelena was a victim for most of her life. One of her first acts as a baby was to use magic to save 2 strangers from a falling branch. They did have to do a couple of flashback retcons to clarify what her first backstory episode only implied, in that she was a fundamentally good person who just got broken by all the rejection she experienced.
How can you say that to your own daughter?
Because you're not my daughter!
I mean, her stepfather hammered it in that her magic made her inherently wicked, even when she used it to help people. She was also raised to suppress her own identity, with an alcoholic parent who reveals she's adopted in the cruelest way and then blames her for his addiction.
What do you think drove me to drink, child?
The wizard then reveals she was given up at birth and the stuff about her sister so he can get something from Rumpelstiltskin and continue conning people. Rumpel provides the family she needed, and then drops her because he can't use her the way he can Regina. You can see she was happy to get a chance to start over with the other Witches of Oz, but she had been passed over in favor of other people most of her life that when Dorothy came along, it's understandable that she'd assume that was the case too. And yeah, she still tricked Neil into his own death, threatened Henry and wanted to use a baby for her revenge, but hey, that's why we love tragic villains. So after the Camelot arc, which was Sand Snake's level of awful, and I'm not sure what they were doing with Zelena, she finally gets her time in the Underworld arc.
I did it for you!
Of course, the best way in this show to add some layers to an evil character is to give them a love interest.
This is about
getting back at the families who never believed in us.
While I didn't like this version of Hades for reasons that could probably make a mini video of their own, he actually is the best choice to steer Zelena to the light side. After all, he has issues with a more brilliant sibling, and his evil plan also involves getting a better life for himself.
And the only way to be safe is to use this power to create a new kingdom.
As he's still evil, it allows her to fall in love with him without going on the defensive. And the love being genuine means that she's at least getting what she wants without being used. But the conflict is in that the two want love for differing reasons. Hades wants it because a true love's kiss can restart his heart and allow him to leave the underworld and rule over everything. Zelena wants it for its own sake.
Can't we just be happy together? I mean, why do we need a kingdom?
And so, when she experiences love that is genuine, but still ultimately another form of using her, as well as having gained more of it for reasons soon to be unpacked, her redemption comes when she sacrifices Hades for the greater good. She'd previously defined her villainy by rejecting anyone who'd ever rejected her, or who she perceived to, and so an act that was normally done out of spite becomes one of empowerment, rejecting a lifestyle she no longer wanted. And Rebecca made her...
All I ever wanted was love. You told me that was enough for you.
The show had sustained itself on Lana Parrilla and Robert Carlyle's performances for the longest time, but they gained another heavy hitter right here.
Now I realise. Nothing ever will be!
But there was an important previous step in Zelena's redemption that takes place before this.
There's a chapter in our family history you've both forgotten.
Sisters is one of only 2 Season 5 episodes that I found legitimately great, the other being Nimue. It's one of the few later season episodes to bring you to the emotional highs that were plentiful in 1 to 4.
There was a time when you both cared about each other.
What are you talking about?
It requires some heavy-duty retroactive continuity, but I was on board with it.
I wanted to use my magic to help someone for so long. It just came to me.
A flashback to Regina's childhood reveals that Cora once needed Zelena to help lift an enchantment on her, and the two girls actually became friends, and were excited to find out they were sisters, but Cora separated them for the sake of her own plan, and made them forget.
I will find you, I promise!
Actually, you won't.
And honestly, I was just so on board with this story.
Please, don't do this! I promise, I'll be good!
It helped reinforce what a victim Zelena had been throughout her life, and reminding viewers that she always wanted to be good, and got used by everyone before she became a villain, and provides closure to pretty much every issue between her, Cora, and Regina.
You were sisters once, who loved and needed each other.
And Rebecca made her. In scenes alongside heavyweights like Barbara Hershey and Lana Parrilla, boy does she hold her own.
I've waited my whole life to have a mother and now she's gone.
This was the rare thing in the later seasons that had me fully 100% invested, and the kind of vintage once charm that I was begging the show to give me again. So obviously I was Zelena ride or die forever after this.
What about forgiveness? What about redemption?
Season 6 saw her regressing into wildcard status after Regina blamed her for Robin's death, which does kind of undo this, but not fully, and not to Cole Turner levels of bad.
I'm not welcome at the hero's table. Fine.
Instead, it's actually more realistic and somewhat proportionate to the evil Zelena had done in the past. But she gets her official redemption in the episode Where Bluebirds Fly, in which she gives up her magic to save the town from the Black Fairy.
You set me up.
No. I just knew you'd make the wrong decision.
I remember at the time getting very jaded about how little the status quo really changed on the show, so this was a plot development I actually connected to.
Is that what this is about? You proving you're better than all of us?
No.
Zelena had defined herself on proving she was better than Regina in the past, and the main part of this was how powerful her magic was.
Why do you have to be better than everyone else?
Because I am.
She gives up the thing she tied her identity to because, in the end, doing what's right is more important to her.
How do you feel? Weak. Bet you've never looked stronger.
And she also gets this moment.
Miss me?
I don't feel the need to recap everything else Zelena does in the very weird Season 7, because that's not the point here. Obviously, you've all probably guessed that August was my first favourite character on the initial watch, and then when he got screwed it was Mulan and Aurora, and then Robin Hood. Then I floundered around for a long time without one, wondering if the show was even worth carrying on with after the nightmare that was the Camelot arc. And then along comes Rebecca Mader, even though she'd already been around, and she'd just breathed new life into things.
You ripped out the part of yourself that was most like me!
It wasn't enough to bring the show to the heights of its first seasons, but by the end, Zelena felt like such a core part of things, almost as much as Regina, Henry, and the Charmings.
You and I aren't exactly the sisters that our mother wanted us to be, but you're all I've got.
It feels weird to say this about a character who was so heavily defined by envy upon her introduction, but also kind of appropriate given what classic story she hails from. But she provided heart, when the show was so lacking in it. And she got me to not only keep watching in spite of my senses being appalled by the Camelot arc, but she almost redeemed the show completely for me. And that's quite an achievement.
In all your sobbing over Robin's death and your broken heart, all you did was blame me. I sacrificed Hades for you.
Please, Hollywood, give this actress another great role, because we can see she's got plenty to offer.